There was already violence involved, but I, number one, had no language for what was happening to me. I didn't know that it was violence. And number two, it wouldn't have mattered anyway, because he said he was God's best for my life. And I was conditioned to accept whoever said they were God's best for my life. So I was easy prey, easy picking. I was super easy, juicy fruit from the tree.
Welcome back to Prey versus Predator. We have another amazing podcast for you listeners. Today we have another guest from Shiny Happy People, the Duggar Family Secrets, Tia Levings. We are so thrilled to have you here with us. Unfortunately, our co-host Jill is not with us, so it'll just be Amber, myself, and PJ. So just for our listeners who are listening going, where is Jill? We do have questions from her, so she is here in spirit. But welcome, Tia. We are welcome. Thrilled for you to be here. And how would you like to introduce yourself to our listeners?
Oh, yeah. Thanks for having me, first of all. I educate on the abuses in Christian fundamentalism. So that has manifested in the documentary itself, Shiny Happy People, but also I have a memoir coming out next August of 2024 called A Well-Trained Wife, My Escape from Christian Patriarchy. I also write a lot online and create a lot of social media content around anti-fundamentalism, leaving fundamentalism, trauma recovery, religious trauma, pretty much runs the gamut of whatever's in our pop culture or headlines that I can trace to fundamentalist roots, which is more than a full-time job right now. So much going on.
Your social media content, I have to say, is excellent.
Yeah, unbelievable.
It is really, really good, and it is really astonishing. So please follow. Do you want to maybe list your social media accounts right now as we talk about it?
Tia Levings Writer everywhere. That's the handle I use everywhere. Tia Levings Writer.
Yeah, your short reels and all of it is amazing. So thank you for.
Thanks.
Yeah, well, we should get into your story.
Yeah. Would you mind telling our listeners a little bit? We saw you on Shiny Happy People. We were sort of drawn to not just your story, but we were drawn to the energy with which you told your story. It came from a place, or it appeared for us. One of the things we always want to do is look for prey who are powerful and have, and in our minds, prey are always powerful, but you don't always know that because there's so many, especially when you're involved with a predator or a predatory system. In your case, you had the predator and predatory systems.
Correct.
But your energy came across as somebody who has gotten to the other side, and I don't mean that in a finite way, but somebody who is processed and processing and finding your voice and using it to speak and to protect and save other people in your same space. So that was a real attraction for us. But can you tell us, because we didn't really hear a ton about you and your story. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Like, how did you get into this system? Were you born into it? That sort of.
Well, sort of. I mean, my story, first of all, I'm really glad that power conveyed because it's really deliberate. It's my survival strategy can be pretty much encapsulated in how to find and identify, locate, and draw upon my own power in a disempowering situation. So I'm really grateful that came across. And also my story is what I call cooked. It's I escaped my marriage and high control patriarchy in 2007. And I began writing the story in 2010. And I've been writing it for 12, years. It's no longer traumatizing for me to share my story, which is not true of a lot of survivors, where they will be reactivated and re-traumatized in the sharing of their story. So that's what it's called, cooked, when a memoir is able to be shared and the meaning extrapolated from it. That's power. That means that I can share it without becoming victimized again.
I love that.
I've never heard that term, actually. So that's really powerful. Thank you for that.
It's an interesting braid because writing the story, like you'll hear that common advice given to a lot of survivors, is you should write your story. The act of writing it by itself is part of healing because you are able to see it in a more objective light, the events of what happened to you. You have to put them into language in order to write them down.
Right.
You have to name them, which is huge. You have to sit with the definitions and the identities that you may have resisted. You may have a lot of denial about. You may see it from different angles because it's in black and white on page, and you can, like, your sense of inner justice can come into the picture. And then the editing process, like so much of writing is rewriting. So when you go through that process over and over again, you're titrating your story and integrating that trauma into your body. So the act of writing itself is part of your healing journey. So in the end, you have this beautiful end product because you've unlocked your voice. You've told your story. And that's what's happened to me. It's writing my book was the single most best decision of my probably outside of my escape. It helped me change timelines. It helped me completely transform my life. And I always recommend it to survivors. I started as a journal. It wasn't like I didn't set out to write a book. So I always tell survivors, write your story and start with language. But to your question of if I was born in it, it's an interesting parallel. I'm 49, and over the past 50 years, the evangelical church in America has politicized and radicalized, which follows the trajectory of my life. So whereas a lot of us Gen X kids were born into what we might call ordinary Christian homes, it doesn't look that way anymore. What an ordinary Christian home is today does not look like it did in 1974. The first 10 years of my life, I was in Michigan. Excuse me. I was in Michigan, and just church occasionally, a few times a year. My parents both grew up in some kind of Christianity, and so it was part of our vernacular and tradition, but it wasn't dominant. And then we moved to Florida and we joined a megachurch, a Southern Baptist megachurch. That changed everything. And that Southern Baptist megachurch is like right in the middle of the Southern Baptist Convention controversy that we see with the current Speaker of the House that was elected last week. So it really is very full circle for me. The pastors and the influences that were in Mike Johnson's life were also part of my upbringing when I was 12. Like there's a continuity there that's absolutely vivid in history.
Yeah, it is interesting, and we'll get back on topic, but even that Mike Johnson, I heard him say, "What do I believe? Just read the Bible." And I was like, I turned to my co-host here and I'm like, what does that mean? Like, what does that mean? Because the Bible is like, it's such a diverse book about, it's a confusing sentence to me.
It's predatory rhetoric.
Oh. That's because you're on the outside of this. To the insiders, that's a dog whistle. He's signaling to everybody in the conservative movement that scripture is clear. That is a phrase they use. That signals I'm from the same group you're from, and you can trust me. To the rest of us, that sounds like, what? The Bible's full of violence. It's thousands of years old. What the fuck? That's not who he's talking to. He's talking to his people. That's his dog whistle. Scripture is clear is a phrase.
Yeah, but they don't break it down to say, what is it clearly telling you? Because I'm like, if you open Genesis, it's very different than Psalms. And, it's very different than the words of Jesus. I'm like, it's such a massive book with massive stories.
That's what I'm hearing you say, Tia. Yeah. Not to the people he's dog whistling to.
Yeah.
It points into whatever legislation they're talking about at the moment. So he'll pair it with scripture is clear. And then he'll be, voting against LGBTQ marriage. And excuse me, that's what he's saying scripture is clear about. In his tradition, scripture is clearly against gay marriage. Therefore, our American nation should be against gay marriage because our American nation is biblical. And his whole agenda is to make us a biblical nation, which is not what America was ever supposed to be about. But they're dominionists. So they want to take of the country.
I feel like I have 8 other.
We're going to get back to that.
But before I start asking questions,
the point was there's a full circle.
There is a full circle, and I knew we were going in the weeds, but
today.
Let's go back to your story.
We want to know more about you. Before we derail you, we're going to derail you enough for this conversation. We don't have Jill here. She often will bring us back.
Yeah.
So I'm going to try.
Okay. Well, we can start back at the Southern Baptist Church.
Okay.
It was First Baptist Jacksonville. And if you have other religious trauma survivors on here or anyone familiar with evangelical traditions in the past 30 or 40 years, which includes purity culture, very strict rules about what we were to become as girls. You only become a Christian wife and a mother. That's it. If you go to college, it's to either get your MRS degree and get married, or it's to become a teacher or something else that you can use as a mother and as a wife. And so the grooming for over the 18 years, is that they churned out a reliable product of young girls who were virgins on their wedding day. They got married young. They set out to have children. That was the product. The product of the church was to have this very subservient, submissive, complementarian woman who was going to serve and make her world an orbit around a man. So I was just like everyone else that graduated from my class. There's nothing really remarkable about me. We were all very similar. Another thing that was true of that church was that the pastors had both. We had two co-pastors. Jerry Vines was the president of the Southern Baptist Convention, and Homer G. Lindsay was just a Southern Baptist good old boy. There's all these connections to Southwestern and Southeastern theological seminaries. But anyway, they had short engagements, and they really supported that we all have short engagements so that we can get to the good stuff as quick as possible. So I met the man that I married, like December 1st. We were engaged by December 31st. This was in 1994.
Holy moly.
We were married the following year, and there was already violence involved. But I, number one, had no language for what was happening to me. I didn't know that it was violence. And number two, it wouldn't have mattered anyway, because he said he was God's best for my life, and I was conditioned to accept whoever said they were God's best for my life. So I was groomed and conditioned. Easy prey, easy picking. I was super easy, juicy fruit from the tree.
Perfect prey, because you were groomed that way. Here's a question I have: like when you say you didn't know it was violence, or you didn't have a language for violence. Certainly, I have an experience as well that it took so long before I had words to it, and it's hard, I think, for people to understand that point. So before you go on too much with your story, can we backtrack a little bit when you say I didn't know it was violence, but was something in you knows it's not okay, or knows that you don't feel good. So what was the thinking, like what was the grooming in your head that let you keep going?
That's an excellent question. And it's a really important one that goes to the earliest roots of human depravity, understanding original sin, understanding a girl's role in conflict. If there's conflict, it's her job to smooth that over, smile, solve the waves. I have red hair, so I was always told I had a redheaded temper. That definitely colored my entire understanding of anger or assertiveness or opinions, because I'm just me. It's not about my hair color. It's anytime I asserted myself, I could be called temper, which was sin. And so when we got into like a minor conflict, I asked for French fries. When we were dating dating 5 months, we were engaged. I asked for French fries, 69 cents French fries from McDonald's on a road trip. He cuffed me across the throat and threatened to decapitate me by semi-truck on the interstate. Now, I thought that violence is if they punch you in the face. So my thought process interpreted that as I shouldn't have upset you. I asked for too much. It's okay. I can make this better. He must be having a bad day. Like endless excuses and understanding to accommodate and be a good helpmeet. there's just so much that went into that interpretation. So then I would suppress it and, try and get the waves as smooth as possible. It's one of the most significant traumas of my life. It still affects me on road trips today. And it was years before I realized I didn't have any responsibility in that something that happened to me.
That hit so hard. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and also I think, like, even when you're talking, it depends on, like, even your childhood experience. Like, for even the house I grew up in, it was a lot of raging. So whether or not that is how people talk, or that is how somebody in your, your headship, who is your parents or your husband in this sort of umbrella system that Bill Gothard thought up, you be okay with that. I don't know if that's your story, but I could imagine that would be, well, this is what headship is. It makes me think of, even in the documentary, they talked about the gifts, right? You could be a mercy or a prophet. And I hate, I have such a loathing for it, because it justifies being an asshole,
right,
as being a prophet. And if you're a mercy, you shut the fuck up and you take it. And it's so convenient to this predatory system. And it just kind of, it influence, it's just an example of that in your story.
I have an interesting anecdote about that. So we should clarify, I myself wasn't raised Gothard.
Oh, okay.
Overtly.
Right.
If we look back and we look at the pattern, yes, I was. This is what's happening to America, what happened to me. It's the influence and the infiltration. So Gothard's followers had infiltrated our church leadership and had influenced our Sunday school programs, training programs, conversation, role models, everything. We were surrounded by it. So I absolutely was formed by IBLP, theology, doctrine, practices, behavior, standards. But I didn't know to call it that, because nobody puts up, this is from Bill Gothard. He's really, really good at under the radar, and influence versus attribution, part of his humility shtick. So my parents, they're just hardworking Midwestern people who wanted to belong. They brought us to a church because they wanted to have a church family, and they loved the youth programs and the choir and the orchestra and, all of that. And they didn't really know what they were getting us into. And I don't think the church really knew what they were getting into. At this same time period in history, the Southern Baptist Convention was going through a fundamentalist takeover that impacted all the leadership. And Bill Gothard is involved in that leadership. And the church itself was politicizing and becoming more conservative. So while I didn't know at the time that I was learning about the authority structure and head of household and all of that, it was part of my formation, and it was happening. When I met my actual mentors, because by the time I got married and had my first baby, that's when I met a group of women who actually mentored me into the IBLP's materials. They told me I was a prophet. And it's rare for a woman to be a prophet in the IBLP.
Yeah. So we've heard.
Happen.
Yeah.
So now I was a problem, because I'm opinionated. I see the truth. I call it out. I use my mouth. My mouth's going to get me in trouble. My mouth's going to, I'm going to be an asshole, basically, like that. I'm going to have to really work hard to make myself small and polite and demure and submissive and, all of the things. So, I didn't know how rare it was for a woman to be a prophet until I was out and I started connecting with other survivors, and they were like, oh, the women are all mercy and the men are all prophets. And I was like, they said I was a prophet.
Wow.
Maybe I am.
Well, and that is the first time I would say that they were probably correct. You know what I mean? Yeah, because that was my assumption too. If you've got, if you're female, or if you've got maybe a softer spirit, or, a gentler approach, well, you're a mercy.
But interestingly, as a female who even if they have recognized you as a prophet, it sounds like the message to you is really, really work at making that low. Like really, let's take the volume and turn it down to 1. So don't use it too. Sounds like the message. Even if you have that gift, if you were a man, you would use it, and as a woman, you've got to train yourself to not, or to suppress it, which is also what good is it?
Well, that was one of my questions. One of the questions that led to my escape was why am I here? What does God need, and what does my family need that is uniquely me? Because they can swap me out with a better servant, house cleaner. Basically anything could be replaced with a prostitute and a maid. So what do you need me for? Was one of the end questions I asked a week before I escaped.
If Jill was here, Jill would say, I'm going to guess, she has an amazing quote about something about like life is defined by the quality of questions that you ask.
I love that.
And so it sounds like you're asking just the quality of question that you asked yourself in that moment was so powerful. So you're in this relationship, you've got abuse happening, you don't have a language for the abuse. And then take us from there.
Yeah, we got married, and, there's so much focus on being a virgin bride, not a lot of focus on what it means to be a Christian wife. And I had no sex education. So I shut down really fast after my wedding. I was raped 3 times on my wedding night, and I didn't know to call it that. I just knew, wow, this hurts. Wow, I asked him to stop. Wow, I don't know what happened to me. And it was really rough. Like so I should give you a little background. He's got narcissistic personality disorder, bipolar, and borderline. He's also an addict and was not treated. I didn't know that. That's more language I didn't know. And in the 90s, we didn't even talk about that.
No.
But I was trying to navigate it. And so I shut down. I was pregnant really quickly. Long story of the pregnancies is that over that 10 years, I had 9 pregnancies and 5 children. So that was the pace. But we only had sex about once a year because he really hated touch or contact or fluids or intimacy of any kind. So it was always really quick. No kissing, no affection. So sexual, like the sexual abuse aspect included like neglect and just, I don't know what to call it. I've never done. I need to work on that language because we talk about sexual assault and abuse a lot, but we don't talk about the neglect piece of it and the inhumanity, basically. So that was something that was always happening, and the babies were coming, and I got involved with my mentors, my fundamentalist mentors. Well, my first baby was I pregnant still? Just before his birth. And because I was afraid to have a screaming baby, I was afraid to have somebody crying and erratic and not be able to control my household. And this is where the high control situation makes you complicit in your own abuse. In order to stay safe, you have to become so controlling that you're now impacted. Like my personality was radically changing in those years. My sunny, happy disposition, sunflowers and brightness and, happy humor was all, drilling down into this very traumatized, quiet person who absolutely had to keep a firm grip on everything. If I look at pictures from those years, I'm starving. I know that I was scrubbing the house really hard. I was terrified of imperfection. And I have transferred some of that control to everything in my life in the years since. Dealing with my own complicity, when I trace it backwards, I have to trace it back to the beginning and see how it changed me too. It's not, I'm responsible for choices that I made in high control religion, and not all of them were done to me directly. Some of them I was manipulated into because it's survival. So the Gothard mentors are an example of that, because survival required I keep my baby quiet. And so I had to learn the Ezos. I don't know if you're familiar with them. Growing Kids God's Way and Baby Wise is a infant scheduling system that the IBLP promotes. And then after that is Michael Pearl's To Train Up a Child, which
We've
is
talked about
spanking,
that,
which was discussed on the documentary. And so you get involved in these, practices that they don't lead with. They're means to an end. The standard is to run a godly home and, keep your atmosphere calm and quiet and glorifying God. But if you want to achieve that kind of quiet with lots of little children, you're going to employ high control practices, or there will be consequences.
Well, would you say one of those would be the parentification too? That was touched upon in the documentary about it is interesting because years ago when the Duggar show came out, I remember looking at PJ and telling you about this show, and the thing that irritated and made me the angriest was the fact that the older siblings had to take care of the younger ones. Maybe it was very triggering for me, but I was like, that is not right. And you address that, how it's abusive, and maybe it's one of these fundamentalist mentor tactics. I don't know. Could you speak to that a bit? Yeah,
completely. It's an abuse that is born out of necessity, but it's also glorified and used by design. They are very overt with it. You can have as many children as you need to have, because they're, touting this quiverful mindset, which is to have as many babies as you can, unlimited babies, so that you can have a quiverful for the culture war against the West. And if they're going to tell you to have as many babies as you can have, they're going to have to give you some practical solutions for how you're supposed to pull that off. I have a list of things. It's a series. My most popular series is called Ordinary Parenting Things That My Gothard Funding Mentors Said I Could Skip in Order to Have a Quiverful. And these are parenting aspects, raising children, that a lot of people assume are necessary, but we just didn't do, so that we could have as many babies as possible. So that included things like play dates, pants, doctors, pediatricians, education for girls, college. And there's just a whole long list of it. One of these ways was to employ the use of our older children. So they would just overtly say, because I would say, how am I going to take care of 3 kids under 3? And how am I going to do this? And they would say, well, it's only hard for a few years, and then your older children will be old enough to help you with the youngers. And parallel to this, they're glorifying the sibling relationship, the beauty of the closeness, the benefits it is for each sibling to be close to somebody that's very different in age to them. The aesthetic, the beautiful aesthetic is constantly propped. And so you're lulled into forgetting that your older children have needs, and that taking care of the baby, having the baby in the bed, not doing their schoolwork because they have to babysit and parent your children, isn't meeting your older child's needs. It might be helping you take care of a lot of babies, and it might be helping the little baby have a close bond with somebody, and rather than get lost in a sea of children. But that older child's needs are being completely neglected. And it's one of the most harrowing and longstanding forms of abuse that survivors talk about, that it impacts them for the rest of their lives. They lose their childhoods, and these are girls, mostly girls, that are parentified from the time they're 7 or 8 years old all the way through. They're exhausted of parenting by the time they're adults. So they've lost their normal childhood years, and they'll spend the rest of their life trying to heal from that.
Obviously they're not encouraged to get an education if you're female and all that, but would the boys, would they be encouraged to get an education? Because education is, I don't know. Because I'm familiar with a Christian school, and I know a lot of people. I left midway through my training as a child, so I went to the public school. And I've got an education, but I know a lot of people who didn't get an education because that wasn't encouraged from the school that I was a part of.
It's it depends how you define education. It's streamlined and it's manipulated to the purpose. So boys, a lot of resources were devoted to the boys. They did get better education than girls, because the argument that a girl's not going to need that kind of influences the weather. Like they're just, all of their higher education is minimized, sometimes deliberately truncated so that they can't leave. But with boys, like I saw a lot of emphasis on patriotism, government preparations, getting ready to go. Like there's so much Bible curriculum, like so much spent times. We called it education, but it's not what the rest of the world would consider a well-rounded education with a broad worldview. This is a very narrow world. At the same time, I still have this part of me that values home education and the attention that can be devoted to a child's personal strengths and the scary landscape parents are facing today, with education choice. And so I tend to be kind of careful in this area. I just so much educational neglect and religious indoctrination that is sheltered because of the homeschooling aspect to this. And it's control. It all comes down to control. They're not raising individuals who are going to go out and impact the world for good. They're raising uniformed soldiers in their culture war. And so, yeah, education's relative.
Yeah.
So you're at this place in your life where you've got 5 children, you've got an abusive partner, you're inundated with mentors who are what sounds like continuing this process of sort of weaponizing your empathy and compassion and desire to be good or to be good enough or to please. How do you get out of this? How did you transition into you were all in?
Mm-hmm. All right. So I was looking at 3 kids under 3 in 99, and I was scared of how I was going to do that. And I had a feeling something was wrong. And when I went into labor at 32 weeks, I knew that was too early to deliver a baby at home safely. I wasn't supposed to go to doctors or the hospital. They were all, very afraid of that I would be involuntarily vaccinated, or they would urge me to terminate if something was wrong with my baby. At 32 weeks, that wasn't going to happen, but whatever. I was scared and I went to the doctor, and they found a heart defect, and she was born at term, 39 weeks, and had hypoplastic left heart syndrome. I spent 2 months in the hospital with her. She had heart surgery, and I really started mentally breaking away from my mentors at that time. It's the first time I was away from them on my own, around career women and doctors and science. And then she died the night we were supposed to go home.
Oh,
and
I'm sorry.
It completely altered me. That world bypasses grief so extremely, and children are so interchangeable. They allowed me to be a little sad about it, but then it was, give God the glory and move on. Keep having babies. Don't talk about it. Don't make us uncomfortable. God answers prayer when it's a good thing, but when something bad happens, like the baby dies, we don't want to talk about that, And I was not able to do that. I was not able to live my life as if she didn't exist. And it caused a chasm within me to have to hold this grief that I could not hold. I hadn't ever lost anybody, let alone a child. And my kids were my whole reason for being. And ultimately they're what saved me. They're what pulled me through. They're the whole reason I didn't commit suicide. There's just so much with motherhood in my story. And to lose a baby was, a direct confrontation of that. And so I had to confront, how I was going to hold her legacy. And she wasn't supposed to have a legacy in fundamentalism because she died. That was number one. Is as simple as while they were praying for us in the hospital, they wanted us to give our testimony. And when she died, they didn't want our testimony anymore because it didn't have a good outcome. That kind of very practical, granular level. And I was like, fuck that. No, she lived, she changed me. I'm not the same person. I can't go back to who I was before her. And so from a character standpoint, it broke me open, and I started asserting myself in ways that I couldn't have before. I stopped spanking my children. I stopped I started integrating other methods of homeschool. I was just making choices that were important to me, bolstered by each one. And so internally, this independence was growing. And what I was doing was self-actualizing. I was only 23 years old when she died. So I was going through the actualization process of a child becoming an adult through these hard situations. I didn't know to call it that. That's the language I have today. But at the time, my assertiveness and independence was growing. And so 7 years passed. During that time, our theology became more restrictive and more fundamentalist. We left the IBLP, but we get into some darker chapters of America that are very much alive and thriving. And it was 7 more years before, from a physical standpoint, I could leave. But the emotional and mental steps began in 99.
So, this already, if we can just take a quick second here in terms of you got to escape for a brief period of time. We call it like a praycation.
Yes.
Because that's one of the ways in that moment, in that time, you are able to start doing something that this predatory system does not ever want you to do, which is to touch base with yourself, to rely on your own intuition, to rely on you and your thoughts and your thinking. And it gave you the space to connect to something. It's almost like your daughter was the spark that lit this fire in you, like an anger, a connection to yourself. Amber you talk a lot about how anger is the thing that,
for me, it's fuel. Anger is fuel. You can be, even in the Bible, it says, be angry, but don't sin, but it's fuel. It's fuel.
But I think what a legacy in many ways, this life that you had so briefly acted as this fire, acted as the spark, acted as the thing that is that true for you?
I call it clarity. Her name was Clara, and it means clarity. And that's what she gave me. She helped me see in a very visceral, stark way what life was, what real love was. In that 2-month period where I was at the Ronald McDonald House in Atlanta, Georgia, I was doing all sorts of things. I love the word praycation because I was doing all sorts of things I wasn't supposed to be doing.
That's amazing.
Such as, living independently and making decisions, big medical decisions on my own. And I was getting a break from having my toddlers were with other people, which was heartbreaking and difficult, but also allowed me space to rest and think. My daughter was in this CICU, so it was very regimented, and that the result of that was rest and a little break from the violence. It did find its way to me there. We have a pretty bad abuse scene in the middle of that. We threw me out of a car on Mother's Day, but for the most part, I had a break, and then I had a huge break when she died because it split me open, and it is mother rage. But there's just no way. It was more emotion than my body could contain in so many different ways.
That you had a chance to connect to you, but how much of that system is set up for you to never do that?
Right.
Right? To hurt yourself, to demean yourself, to keep yourself, so you never get that space to trust you. That seems to be the thing that's terrorizing for the system.
It's the fruit of all the isolation. So like on the surface, they can argue about vaccines and doctors all day long. The end result, if you never see a doctor, is that your children never see a mandatory reporter, and you never hear about resources that would be available to you. And that's the ultimate goal. What the fruit of what's happening is their ultimate goal. The rest of it is just distraction.
Yeah. Evil genius. I call that evil genius. It's just the way that the predator's brain thinks is absolutely to be, it's so diabolical. It's so completely and utterly void of empathy or compassion, and yet it knows how to weaponize empathy and compassion. But I think we were
talking about that. Even we asked a doctor, do you think that these people who are evil geniuses like have a blueprint? Like, I know what I'm going to do, or is it all intuitive to what they need in the moment, and it becomes like a momentary decisions? And it seems like it might even be both, because it sounds like these movements have somewhat of a blueprint and thinking on a level that is like for the future. How do we manipulate governments? How do we eugenics? All of that. But also there's these like instinctual needs that these predators have.
I think it's both, because the systems themselves are comprised of like narcissists. I'm not a doctor and can't diagnose people, but there's a personality of a high control personality and a woundedness in them that makes them want this kind of system in the first place and congeal and create these systems. And then everything is just a capitalistic tool to them. So one thing I say a lot is that they used my own motherhood against me all the time. They would use the thing that you love the most against you because it's just a tool in their hands. And if you're empathetic and kind, that's just material for them to use. That's just a way to get at you and make you do what they want you to do. And they know you will, because you're kind and you're serving and you're accommodating. They're not stupid. I haven't really met any stupid patriarchs. They're all really shrewd.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Like, if you don't understand what they do, and you don't understand that they have different brain structures than you do, they have a different understanding. And but I think we're getting off topic, and we want to make sure that
you were talking about this dark period of time. I would like to know what language or what voice did you have internally? Because in the documentary you talk about like, there's this corporal punishment with your husband and you as a spouse, which it was new to me that was even a thing.
Right.
They call it, what would it be called? You had a term for it.
They call it Christian domestic discipline.
Okay.
And that's important language to use. It's been scrubbed from the internet, but you can get to it from the Wayback Machine. And as a parallel, I will say, just like you can't take, for example, a modern today example, you will never find Mike Johnson's name next to Bill Gothard's name. That has been scrubbed. We can tell through relationship that it's very likely they've been in the same room, at the same table, in the same congregations, doing the same things, and they share all the same cronies. The exact same thing happens in the world of discipline. So when you are starting out with someone like Michael Pearl, who teaches extreme discipline, and you add to them all these other authors, for example, Martha Peace wrote The Excellent Wife. A lot of women read that book, and that's all about how to stay with a man even though he's abusing you and hurting you, how to be submissive and kind to somebody who's mean to you. Add to him Doug Wilson, which is where we went next. Doug Wilson has a thriving ministry in America, in Moscow, Idaho today. He's a mean, cruel misogynist who speaks cruelly to people. And he teaches federal marriage. Federal marriage teaches that a man is responsible for everything that goes on in his household, including his wife's thoughts. And he will answer before God on Judgment Day for everything his wife said and did. So if he, just put yourself in his shoes for a second, if you're a husband and you're going to stand on Judgment Day for what your wife did, you're going to be damn sure that she obeys you and does what you need her to do so that you don't go to hell. The stakes are always hell. So put it all together in the same room, in the same books, in the same conversations. And what happened when the internet was new is that women had forums where we were talking. Men also had forums where they were talking. And R.C. Sproul Jr. Was a columnist in his father's magazine, Table Talk magazine. And R.C. Sproul Jr. is affiliated with Doug Wilson. They formed their own denomination because, of course, they did. Doug Wilson has his own press and university and town and denomination. He's a megalomaniac of the highest order. But R.C. Sproul Jr. had something called the basement tapes, and men would get these tapes and listen to them in their cars like sermons. But this is the beginning of what we call the Theo Bros, where they sit around and toss these big lofty ideas about God and smoke cigars and drink whiskey and talk about doctrine. The basement tapes are like the origin of that. And there were private forums where they would talk about, well, how do you get your wife to obey? And like, how do you actually run a federal household? And how do you keep the order in your home? And it can be as simple as like teaching your children the catechism. They would talk about like, well, how do you do catechism drills? They would also talk about how to discipline your wife. And so there were forums called all around Christian domestic discipline. And it was a thing behind the paywall. And it's a thing that has largely been scrubbed from the internet, but there's survivors that are telling their stories. And my DMs certainly are full. All I had to do was say it out loud. That's all it took, was me to say it on Amazon or in my reels. And then they're like, oh, that happened to me too. I was a pastor's wife and that happened to me too. So spanking your wife, like you're using Michael Pearl's methods, and he doesn't, if you read his books, there's no age limit. And so you will hear survivors say, I was an adult daughter spanked until I was 18 and left my house. I saw my mother disciplined. It happens. It's not the most widespread practice because not all men want to spank their wives like children. It's just another abuse that's sheltered under the umbrella of authority and allowed because of the means to the end that it brings them.
Unbelievable.
Sorry.
I know, and I'm breathing. I'm taking that in. I'm going,
we can breathe for a minute.
Yeah, like I need a breath from that because it is yes. So, and what you're saying is that it's kind of not spoken of in these mega churches, but it's happening. And
it's happening just like everything else that's happening. They also don't lead with, we're not feeding our children enough food, or we are not properly educating our kids. They don't lead with that out in the open. It's part of the behavior that happens behind closed doors. And the only way anybody's going to ever know it is if somebody who lived behind closed doors somehow has the healing to talk about it. Like they have to come all the way through it, get out, be safe, do the work, and then be able to say it. And the statistical likelihood is not high, which is, I guess, why I do the work that I do, because there's just not many like me.
Well, Thank you. What I was going to say is that's why we wanted to move mountains to talk to you, because we need praise voices. We need people like you. But help us bridge that gap between where you were, like so in your story where we left you, you had this break. And you started to do the dangerous work of actually connecting to yourself. And yet at the same time, but there's 7 years between when you have this break and start connecting to yourself. And there's this world that now you are still in, you are still dominated and controlled by, that is promising to rip you from your authentic self, and very much is designed to do that. Are you trying to hold on to your authentic self? Are you trying to take us through those 7 years to where, and then what happened that you got out of that?
Yeah, the irony is that those 7 years are largely very happy.
Okay.
I really thought I had a grip. For at least 5.5 of those years, I really thought I had everything under control, because I had become, at that point, a very high control person. I led, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Terry Maxwell's Managers of Their Home. It's a program where you divide your house, your whole day into 15-minute increments.
Wow.
I had, and you can see it on the Duggars show, like they have the color-coded chart on the wall. And I'm like, oh, that's Terry Maxwell's Managers of Their Homes. It's called Moth if you want to Google it. But I had a very regimented household. I thought I was a great Christian wife. I was, by that point, we were Presbyterian, so it was not as dour as the IBLP Vision Forum. Doug Phillips' Vision Forum kind of is the main influence in those years. And Vision Forum was fundamentalism with a better aesthetic. It was very beautiful. They had gorgeous catalogs with full color bleeds and all these toys for boys and girls and families in matching clothes. And it was all very attractive. And I was able to do it. My children are gorgeous. We all dressed alike. We looked like the Duggars show. This is when the Duggars show hit TV in 2003, 2004 era. And so I focused on just giving my kids the most beautiful childhood they could. I was really grateful for life and motherhood. I was, this was still in tribute to my daughter. And I felt like I had a good grip on everything. The way I was coerced into the discipline aspect of it was because I was pregnant again. And so I was trying to keep my baby safe. It was sold to me as a way to reduce violence. It would reduce all the erratic violence because he would have a method of correction that was agreed upon. And I wasn't in a position to argue. I'd gone to a counselor, Christian counselor at that time.
No.
And when it was first posed to me, and I told him everything that happened to me. And he gave me what I now know is the Southern Baptist Convention party line, is that divorce is a covenant, and it is never, marriage is a covenant, and divorce is never allowed. And he said, the counselor said he saw it all the time, and that my job was to honor my husband more. So I didn't have a way out. There's no like hire an attorney and leave. And so I focused on what I had within my realm, which was running a really sharp household and educating my kids. And I looked for little freedoms in like book choice, including art, taking them to museums, going to the library, taking field trips, making friends with non-fundamentalist homeschoolers. Those were my freedoms, and how I got through. And then it pretty much helped me tread water through the majority of that time until we moved to Tennessee. My husband needed to isolate me further at that point, as I was, I guess, getting too free, too big for my britches. I was making money as a photographer. I was starting to write. And the advice was to go worship with a congregation of like minds. And that existed in Tennessee, back to R.C. Sproul Jr. And his congregation. And so there was a congregation of like minds in Knoxville, Tennessee. And so we moved in 2005. And that it went downhill pretty fast after that.
What do you attribute that to?
It's a combination of things. Being in a like-minded congregation with wife spankers is dark. Like, it's dark. We were very
so dark.
It was just very patriarchal, very, very much like, if you watch The Handmaid's Tale, I call my story the prequel to The Handmaid's Tale, because at this point, I mean, that congregation was like living in Gilead. And at the same time, I had a foot in the secular world, or the secular homeschooling world in Tennessee. So I was like 4 days a week. We were in Boy Scouts and American Heritage Girls, and doing all this stuff with the fun Knoxville homeschoolers. But then the other 3 days of the week, anytime we were involved with our church, I was wearing a head covering. I wasn't supposed to speak. And it was just the darkest of the dark. And I was getting more depressed and suicidal at that point. We moved to this mountain town where my every move was watched by the neighbors and reported to my husband. And his mental health was slipping at the same time, and domestic violence was increasing at the same time. And so a lot of factors came into play. It was never just one thing that broke it. I started writing in 2004, and my blog took off. Basically, what happened is that I was really good at writing for the internet, and my blog was making good traffic gains. I was getting 60,000 hits a day. And this is a massive lifestyle blog. This is before the Panda algorithm of Google. And so you could do that. And so this was like, Pioneer Woman was one of my buddies when we were blogging, we comment on each other's blogs. And there was just like a whole blog roll of lifestyle mommy bloggers. And we were the first ones, and mine was doing really well. And I was using my own name, which was so dangerous and bad. The elders all had a problem with this idea that I was writing in my own name and speaking for my family. And so the church discipline meetings began.
You were being a prophet.
What's that?
You were being a prophet.
I guess I was.
Yeah, you were
I was just blogging. This is what's so silly about that blog.
I know.
was blogging about our field trips in Tennessee, apple picking, art that I liked. There was nothing provocative about this site, except that it was called Living Deliberately. And the tagline was, "What if you want to change your life?" So I was clearly working things out.
Yeah.
And the elders read it every day, which I thought was hilarious. I was like, they don't want me writing, but they sure are really obsessed with this little housewife blog.
How did your husband feel about it too? Did he even care, or was it he cared once they cared?
He cared once they cared, because it was one more thing to have to pay attention to, because he wasn't managing life very well at that point. He wasn't managing him or life or the extreme load that was on his shoulders. You'll hear me say in my work a lot that no, everyone suffers in fundamentalism. And the truth of the matter is, I had a mentally ill husband who needed help. He needed a doctor and he needed care, and he had more responsibility put on his shoulders than was appropriate, because there was a full-fledged adult in this marriage with him, and I could have carried my weight instead of been a subservient, shadow in the back to be controlled. We could have had a partnership, and that would have relieved some of his burden. But that was denied. It's all that's denied you. So chronologically, that was the discipline meetings began in winter of 2006. We were excommunicated in April because I wrote about Mary, the Mother of God, which was heresy. I wrote that men needed women. That was heretical.
Wow.
They didn't like that.
Wow.
And then without the external controls keeping him in line, my husband could not handle anything. It completely fell apart. He needed those external controls to keep, going. And so it just exploded. That we had like a year of hell. And then October 31st, 2007, after 4 hours of holding me hostage, I escaped and took the kids and left at midnight. So we've just had that anniversary last week.
Yeah, I was just thinking
why I'm
that.
a little bit activated and sensitive yet.
Again, I think we need to take a breath. I just think your story is so powerful, and probably for our listeners, it might, elements. Everybody's story is so different, right? But we can always feel, especially if we have had some trauma in our history, we can feel it tangibly in our own bodies. So it's just take a breath with that and let it land, and honor the fact that you're telling us a story. Thank you.
Yeah.
Because I think what you said in the beginning was about telling your stories and how we need to tell our stories, but sometimes it's too much at first. And I think that's super powerful. But right now I'm moved the fact that you are telling this, and it's a moving story, but just even the fact that you've done the work to get to this place to tell us a story. I thank you for that.
I always say that if you're holding a memoir, for example, of a survivor story in your hands, it always has a happy ending, because they lived to write the story and to tell the story. And so you can always know that, even if the story itself gets very difficult. My story is very difficult, and it is visceral. But I'm okay. I'm more than okay. And I knew as it was happening that I had this little survivor's voice in my head that said, you're going to use this someday. You're going to make something with this. Because that's the only meaning I can find in it. It took so much from me. It took so much out of my life and my years and my youth and my energy and my body. And it robbed me of so much. Being able to make something helpful with it is a way to reclaim and redeem. So that is why I do it. I mean, there's the bigger picture of what happened to me on a small personal scale is happening to our wider culture and our nation.
Yeah.
It's relevant to today's audience. And it's a cautionary tale. And I can tell you what it's like to live in their America, and their world. But more personally, I tell it because I have to make something with it. I have to do something useful with it, or it doesn't make any sense to me at all, which is not to say it happened for a reason. It says I'm just taking the material given and trying to make something beautiful with it.
There's a quote by Carrie Fisher. I think it's like, take your pain and make art or something to that effect. And I've always loved that because that's one of the things I think where we get beauty from. It's the imperfectness and the...
Yeah. We can't change what happens to us.
No.
You know, it happened.
Yeah.
This happened, but it is not going to get I'll say this till I die. It took my past. It does not get my present and future too. That's on me. I get to say how I'm going to use my story.
Tia, I feel like you embody our hashtag, which is hashtag pray power.
That's high praise. Thank you.
Thank you. Like honestly, thank you, because it means the world to have people who have gotten in touch with that power, but who were overcome by predatory people
and systems
and digging down and finding that space of finding you. That is the gift that you offer us, and that was held back from all of us for so long is so cruel to your voice and to the rest of us who soar when you speak your truth. And yet, if it hadn't happened, we wouldn't get to hear your incredible story. I know, like I feel like this is just, we're getting to the beginning.
Part 2. We need a part 2.
So would you be, we would love if you would come back and kind of take us to, because at this point in your story, you just have gotten kind of sort of out, and I'm dying to ask you, where did you go? But don't answer it, because if you're willing to come back, I would love for you to tell us in part 2, where did you go? And then how did you get here?
Yes.
Right.
So if you'd be willing to do that, that would be amazing.
You're so welcome.
Thank you.
Any opportunity to get the word out.
Yes. And so stay tuned for part 2. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tia.